David has always been one of my favorite characters in the whole Bible, especially the Old Testament. I love this guy. He's always stood out to me as one of the most fascinating figures in all of Scripture because and we're going to see this, throughout this series, he's a complicated man. He's remarkably gifted. He has this heart for God, and yet he's deeply, deeply flawed. And we're going to see that through the series that David makes some terrible choices, and yet through all the highs and the lows of his life, he's remembered as a man after God's own heart. And we've certainly seen that the past 2 weeks. When we began this series, we talked about David the shepherd, and then last week, David the warrior. And this morning, we're going to look at David, a side to David I think a lot of us can relate to, and that is David the hunted and the hated. And we're going to see how David was treated so harshly, so unfairly, and how he chose to respond to that. And so before I get into it, I'd love for you to raise your hand if this is you. I wonder how many of you have ever been treated unfairly? Yeah, I figured most of us, if not all of us, would raise our hand for that because that's just a common thing, right? I remember as a kid when it was around Christmas time, me and my younger brother Micah, we woke up Christmas morning and we got some brand new bikes, and we were so excited to go outside and ride our bikes. And in our neighborhood, there was a few neighborhood kids. There was one neighborhood kid, and I even hesitate to call him a kid. He was much older than us. He may have been an adult. I don't know. He was huge, and he was kind of a bully. And anytime there was something that we had that he wanted, he would often take it from us, fight us for it. And this morning, or that Christmas morning, he saw the bikes, and he went up to my brother Micah, and he said, "Hey, can I ride your bike?" And Micah said, "Well, I just got this. I want to ride the bike, so no." And he said, "No, I want to ride it. Give it to me." And he said, "No." And so they just start fighting over this bike. He grabbed the handlebars, and they're back and forth. And when he realized, I'm not going to get this bike, he slammed the bike into my brother, and the gears just gashed my brother's shin, and he started to bleed. And as the older brother, just watching that, and some of you know what I'm talking about, something just rose up inside of me. It didn't matter how big this guy was or how much facial hair he had on his face. Something was just like, don't mess with my brother, and I remember I just jumped on his back, and I'm just hitting him in the back of the head as hard as I can with my tiny little fist, and I said, "Don't mess with us, we are Alfaros." And I don't know why I said that. I think I just wanted the word to get around that you don't mess with Alfaros, because if you do, we jump on your back like a monkey and we just start hitting you. But the thing was, it was just we were treated in this unfair way, and I do what we all naturally do. I fought back. And that's our most natural reaction, isn't it? It's just when something is not fair, when it's not right, I'm not going to stand for this. I'm going to do something about it. And we fight back, we defend ourselves, we resist, we revolt. And this morning, we're going to look at how David found himself in a similar spot, how he was treated so unfairly, so unjustly. And it really would have been easy for David to fight back or defend himself or to plan his revenge. But instead, we're going to see how David decides to wait on God, which can be so difficult for us to do. And so before I get into that part of his story, I want to give us just a quick review of where we've been. We were introduced at the beginning of this series to David. He was around 16, 17 years old at the time. He's a shepherd boy who is anointed by the prophet Samuel. Unexpectedly, Samuel shows up at his family's doorstep, and he anoints David to be the next king of Israel, which was just really crazy because Israel had only had one king at this point, and his name was King Saul. And now that David's being anointed, it's a little complicated because Saul is still functioning as the king. He's still got the title and the throne and the palace and the power. But now, from this point on, in God's eyes, David is the true king in waiting. And last week, Pastor Daniel talked about David's first public battle against a 9-foot-tall giant named Goliath. It's a classic story that most of us know, where it's just this underdog story where David, he goes into the battle with no military experience, no armor on, nothing but a sling and a few stones. But because God is clearly with David, he wins the battle. I mean, it's not even close. David wins the battle. He defeats Goliath in front of the entire Israelite army. And you have to understand that overnight, David becomes the most famous person in all of Israel. And so that's where I want to pick it up in 1 Samuel 18, verse 6. It says, when the victorious Israelite army was returning home after David killed the Philistine, talking about Goliath, women from all the towns of Israel came out to meet King Saul. And they sang and danced for joy with tambourines and cymbals. And this was their song: Saul has killed his thousands, and David his 10,000s. And this made Saul very angry. Why was Saul angry? Well, if you think about it, David, he's this 17-year-old teenager. And now everybody in the nation knows his name, and people love him, and they adore him, and they're already starting to write songs about him, and he just becomes this legend, which isn't a bad thing in itself, but it's a terrible combination for an insecure king. And so Saul, in his mind, he's thinking, okay, like, what's to stop this kid from becoming so famous that he takes the throne away from me? And so from this point on in the story, Saul becomes completely paranoid. He just starts plotting, like, okay, what can I do to stop this? How do I get rid of this kid? And Saul's jealousy just boils over. At one point, in a fit of rage, he just decides to pick up a spear and he hurls it at David inside the palace, trying to pin David to the wall. He tries to kill him. But David escapes and runs out, and he tries this multiple times, and David, he flees, and so that's not working for Saul. So then he comes up with a much more subtle plan, and he offers David his daughter's hand in marriage. Because he's thinking, okay, if David's in the family, then I'll be able to control David, and I'll still get to be king. So Saul approaches David, and he says, hey, David, how would you like to marry my daughter? How'd you like to be the king's son-in-law? That's not a bad deal, is it? And it wasn't. I mean, most people would have found that to be an extremely attractive offer. You know, anybody would have wanted this, the amount of power that you would have if you were related to the king. But this is why I love David, because his heart, he just shows his heart in this, the way he responds. He responds in such a humble way. He says, King Saul, I'd love to, but I'm not worthy to marry your daughter. Like, I come from a humble family. We're not wealthy, you know, and I'm not worthy of her. But this was all part of Saul's plan, and he tells David, oh no, I don't care about money. You know, all I really want is to get rid of my enemies. So I'll tell you what, if you personally kill 100 Philistine soldiers, then I'll let you marry my daughter. And Saul's thinking, like, surely this kid's gonna get himself killed doing this, and that'll take care of my problem. I won't have to worry about him. So David says, okay, and he just heads out, and he kills not 100, but 200 trained Philistine warriors. And so the plan totally backfires on Saul, because now David is more famous than he was before. Like, before, he was a giant killer, but now he's a giant killer who has personally taken down 200 Philistine soldiers. He's become a military legend. He's like a warrior legend, and this just keeps happening. David's getting more and more popular, and Saul is causing Saul to get more and more jealous. And so he just goes, I got to do something about this. He just keeps sending David out on these impossible missions, and he's thinking, surely David is going to die in the process, but somehow David keeps surviving. And the more successful David is, the more obvious it is to everybody that, you know what, David's not just lucky, and David's not just skilled, but like, there's something special about David. God has his hand on David's life, which, boy, in turn, it makes Saul even more jealous and more paranoid, and it was like this vicious cycle. So now David, he's more famous than he's ever been. He has more influence than he's ever had. Everybody loves him. He's married now to the king's daughter. His best friend is the king's son. And Saul is so insecure, so jealous, he just cannot handle it anymore. And so it all kind of culminates to this one night at dinner. Saul calls a feast, and he invites David to the feast. And David doesn't show up because David is kind of, at this point, knows Saul's going to kill me. And so he doesn't come to the feast. And Saul, he just loses it at this dinner. And he basically says to everybody at the table, look, I'm tired of pretending that I don't see what's going on here. Do you not think I know that you've all sided against me with this shepherd boy? And because of this, David must die. And so now it's not this sort of secret thing. It's like out there, like David must die. He becomes a fugitive because David is forced to flee the city. And for the next 8 years of David's life, he is on the run from King Saul and the entire Israelite army. Now, I know that's a lot of information, but here's the thing I want us to see, and it's important to remember. David didn't do anything wrong. I mean, he did everything right. He loved the king. He honored the king. He did everything the king asked him to do and more. But because Saul is so threatened by David, David's now forced to be this fugitive. He has to run for his life. And I just state the obvious, that's not fair. That's not right. David is supposed to be the king. Samuel the prophet anointed David, which meant in God's eyes, Saul is no longer the king. David was the king, and David knew this, and so he's holding on to this promise that he got when he was just a teenager. And so for 8 long years, though, all of that seems to be put on hold because of a threatened, insecure king who wanted to kill him, and that's just not fair. It's not. And we don't like things when they're not fair. My wife, Danielle, some of you know her. She is what I would call a justice person. And she, when something is not fair, she feels it deeply in her soul. And this is for the big things and then the things that do not matter. She just is a justice person. And I remember one time we were at Disney World, and we were having a magical time standing in lines all day. And we were in this really long line for a ride, and we waited like over an hour, and we finally get up to the front of the line. It's almost time to get on the ride, and this group of teenagers decide to cut the line right at the front. Okay, now I saw it, and I'll be honest, it irritated me. Like, we've been waiting all that time, but I'm not going to cause a scene at Disney World. I don't want to say anything. But Danielle, excuse me. No. Y'all need to get out of the line and go to the back and wait like everybody else. We've been waiting, okay? Like, you can't just cut in front of everybody. And so she's making this big fuss, and suddenly it's like it emboldens the crowd. And so now everybody, they're just like these poor kids, yeah, get out of line, and everybody suddenly, they're so courageous. And so then the Disney cast member, sees the commotion. She comes over and she makes the kids get out of the line, and they're forced to have this walk of shame, all the way to the end of the line. And I looked at Danielle, and Danielle felt great. She was like, well, that turned out nicely. Like, she's thinking, justice has been served. And we laugh about that, but the truth is that we all have moments like that, moments where everything in us just rises up and says, that's not fair. That's not right. Maybe you're here today and that's where you find yourself. You think, I did the right thing, and it still didn't work out. Maybe at work, I was honest. I had integrity. I chose not to cut corners, and yet I didn't get the promotion. The guy who got the promotion, he was not honest. It's not fair. I stood up for what was right, and I got rejected. I was faithful in my marriage even when it was hard, and you know what? He still left. I stuck to my convictions, and because of that, I lost my job. I obeyed God. I did what he asked me to do. I stepped out in faith, and the moment I did that, everything got so much worse. And perhaps you're here and you're in a season like that and you're just wondering, like, God, where are you? Why is this happening to me? This isn't fair. This isn't right. Why aren't you doing anything about this? Why are you not taking care of this problem in my life? And it's so easy to get discouraged during those times when you're just trying your best to live for God and do the right thing, and in return, it just feels like life is not fair. But here's what I want you to see, that during David's fugitive years where he is hated and hunted, when his life was the most unfair it had ever been to that point, he comes to the most amazing conclusion, and here it is. It's not about me. It's not about me. It's about God's will. It's about God's way, and it's about God's time. It's not about me, it's about God's will and God's way and God's time. And this is, I'm telling you, man, David had some flaws and weaknesses, but this is what I love about David, is that at the end of the day, God's heart is what he's after. And he is just convinced, as unfair as this situation is, as confusing as it is, God is still in control. And even though I don't understand why God's promise has been delayed in my life, I just trust that there is a purpose in the waiting. And I'm gonna trust that God's story for my life is bigger than just this moment. And so David makes the very uncommon, you hardly ever see it, decision to take his hands off the wheel and wait on God. Because David believed it's not about me, it's about God's will. It's about God's way, and it's about God's time. And we see this over and over in his life, but one of the clearest examples is found in 1 Samuel 24, where David has an opportunity to take care of King Saul. He has the opportunity to kill him. He has the opportunity to take care of his problem. And so let me set up the scene before we read it. David has been on the run for a few years now. He's hiding from the king. He's living in caves out in the wilderness. He's moving around a lot, doesn't stay in one place for very long. And throughout these years, he's slowly but surely acquired a group of 600 followers. I say followers, but these people they're living, they're more like a band of outlaws, really. I mean, these are people who they're in debt to the king, they're enemies of the king, they're outcasts, they're deserters. These guys are pretty rough around the edges. And so it's kind of like Robin Hood and his merry men living out in Sherwood Forest. Okay, that's kind of like what's going on here. And these guys are vicious. They are fiercely loyal to David. Well, one day David and these men, they're hiding in a cave, and they happen to be in the same area that Saul and a part of his army are searching for him. They're hunting him down, and they're very close by. And all of a sudden, Saul decides, as he's about to pass the very cave that David and his men are hiding in, nature calls. Okay, this is in the Bible. And he says, okay, hold up, everybody. Let's just kind of pause for a second. I need to take care of something. And he's wants to do it in a dignified area. So he gets off his horse. He takes the toilet paper and he goes into the cave. Okay, the very cave that David and his men are hiding in. I mean, you couldn't plan it any better. And so Saul begins to do his business. I'm going to let you use your imagination on that. How about that? But Saul is in the most vulnerable position possible, and David is just a few feet away, and his men who are so loyal to him, they begin to whisper in 1 Samuel 24:4. They say, now's your opportunity. Today, the Lord is telling you, I will certainly put your enemy into your power to do with as you wish. In other words, David, you got the king right where you want him. Now is your chance. You're never going to get another opportunity like this. This must be God. God has served up Saul on a silver platter for you. And so what does David do? In verse 4, it says, so David crept forward and cut off a piece of the hem of Saul's robe. So David does not kill Saul. He decides to cut on his robe a little bit without him realizing. And I want to hang out here for a second because I don't know about you, but it can be so easy to find myself here every now and again where I'm not going to like directly attack somebody and confront, and I'm going to tell you to your face, here's what I think, but instead I might just cut you down in private. I'm going to just badmouth you a little bit to my friends. I'm just going to kind of vent and complain about your leadership, or I'm going to refuse to forgive this person, and I'm going to hold on to my bitterness. And you know what? Nobody will ever really know about it because I'm not going to publicly say anything. I'm not going to publicly oppose anybody, but I'll just quietly in the background cut on the robe of this person's character, or I'll cut on the robe of their authority, or I'll cut on the robe of their credibility, just enough to sort of weaken them in the eyes of other people without making it look like I did anything wrong. That's not just me, is it? But let's be honest, this is easy to do. Sometimes you don't even realize you're doing it, and you realize after the fact that, like, especially with authorities in your life, they ask you to do something that you don't want to do. Or they say something that I don't agree with that, or I feel like they made the wrong call. And when that happens, on the outside, I look like a team player. I'm nodding and smiling, and I'm submitting on the outside. But on the inside, my arms are folded. I'm digging my heels in. I refuse to submit because my boss is incompetent. She doesn't even know what she's doing. How did he even get this job in the first place? Like, I've been here longer. I should really be running things. I can't believe the pastor made that decision. I mean, nobody asked for my input. If they did, we would have made the right decision. I don't even think he prayed about it. My supervisor, such a joke. He acts like he's in charge, and he's just such a micromanager, but nobody respects him, nobody. And we'll just cut on that robe one thread at a time. And in the moment, I know what we think. We think like it's not a big deal. Nobody even knows. It's not hurting anybody. But it is a big deal, actually, because God knows. In fact, God is actually the one who placed that very authority in your life. Well, I don't know about that, Kirby. I mean, my boss is evil, like evil. Certainly God didn't put this person in my life. My parents are not even Christians. This leader is so clearly against me. This obviously doesn't apply to them, right? Wrong. Romans 13:1 says, "For all authority comes from God, and those in positions of authority have been placed there by God." And when you really get down to it, when you fight against or complain against or revenge against any authority in your life, you're really opposing God. Because you're fighting against what he has established in your life. And even if you are in a similar spot as David found himself in, the authorities who treat you unfairly. And so David does not kill Saul. He just sort of cuts on his robe a little bit. And in verse 5, it says that David's conscience began bothering him because he had cut on Saul's robe. And suddenly, it just becomes so clear to David through this moment of incredible conviction. In verse 6, he says to his men, "The Lord forbid that I should do this to my lord the king. I shouldn't attack the Lord's anointed, for the Lord himself has chosen him." I mean, we're talking about King Saul, the guy who hates David, the guy who is literally in the process of hunting him down like a dog to kill David over jealousy. It's not even over a noble cause. It's over jealousy and paranoia. And David calls him the Lord's anointed. And this is so huge because David looks at his guys and he says, "Look, guys, I know how this looks. I can make one move and speed up the course of my destiny. I could become the king tonight. I get that." David had every reason in the world to kill Saul. He could have said, "I have the right to do this. This is what I deserve." It would have been so easy to justify. I mean, he's been hunting me. He's not going to stop. And so this is really just self-defense. But instead, David says, I will not touch the Lord's anointed. I will not take matters into my own hands. He says, I refuse to violate the will of God in order to gain the blessing of God. because it's not about me. And when everybody kept telling David, and people will do this, when you find yourself in a spot, it seems like everybody around you will tell you this: claim what is yours. Claim what is yours. Are you really not going to take this opportunity? And David responds, no, I will not replace what the Lord has put in place. Because for David, it had to be God's will. It had to be God's way. It had to be in God's time. And so David, in verse 7, restrained his men and did not let them kill Saul. Early on, many years ago, early on in my ministry, I worked under a difficult leader for me. And at the time, I just remember I was in ministry school at the time. I was totally green when it came to being a pastor. I was sort of learning the ropes, and I had no real experience, no framework, no idea what pastors even did, but I felt God called me to this, and so I'm trying to, walk in obedience, but I have no clue what I'm doing. And apparently, this leader wanted to keep it that way because his idea of leadership was just intimidation and humiliation. I'm going to make you look small. I'm going to make you feel small so that in comparison, I look great. And I'm telling you, every correction, it just felt like this personal attack. It was critical. He could be manipulative, even vindictive at times. There were times where he'd just find opportunities to embarrass you. The bigger the crowd, the better, to kind of teach you a lesson. And I'm telling you, after following a leader like that, it would just chip away at my confidence over time. And I really started to wonder and question, like, God, is this really what I'm supposed to be doing? Did I make a mistake going to Bible college? I thought I was called, but it doesn't even seem like I am. I don't know what I'm doing. I'm not doing this well. It was one of the most discouraging and confusing ministry seasons of my life, because I couldn't understand, God, why would you call me into the ministry only to put me under someone who feels so against me? And I thought, this is so unfair. This is not right. And I didn't know what to do about it. And so this went on for about a year until one day something happened. It seemed to me like the leader's actions finally caught up with him, because he found himself in hot water with his leader. And I knew if there was ever a moment that I could fight back, if there was ever a moment I could damage this person's reputation, if there was ever a moment I could expose what I saw, this was the moment. I just knew, I felt like, okay, and I wanted to, I was planning to, I'm just gonna go and tell my side of the story, and this is probably gonna be enough to seal this guy's fate, and I'll be rid of this guy. But I tell you, those couple of days, I am wrestling with God, like really wrestling with God, because I so badly wanted to take matters into my own hands. I so badly wanted to get revenge. I wanted to fight back with everything in me. But I'll never forget, in the middle of all that wrestling, God spoke to my heart in an undeniable way. And you know how sometimes God speaks to your heart in that still, soft, sweet voice? This was not the way he spoke to me. It was strong, and he said, you do not put your hand to this. I felt it that strong. Don't put your hand to this. This is not your battle. This is my battle. And he brought me to this very story of David, and how David had the opportunity to strike back, to take matters into his own hands, but instead David said, I will not attack the Lord's anointed, for the Lord himself has chosen him. That's the last thing I wanted to hear. But I knew it was the Lord. I knew what he was asking me to do. And so in that moment, I made a decision. I said, God, I'm going to need your help. But with your help, I'm going to honor this man. Now, let me just be clear. I'm not saying that this leader was right. I'm not saying it was okay for him to treat people the way that he treated me. I'm not even saying that we should always stay silent in every situation. But in that moment, with that person, in that situation, God was asking me to trust him. And so, I let go and I stepped back and I chose not to put my hand on it. And in time, I don't know what I was so worried about. It's like God always does this. God proved himself faithful. He took care of me. He took care of that situation. Like he did it in a way that only he could. And you see what God was teaching me in that season, and perhaps he's teaching it to you, that ultimately it's not about me. It's not about my call and my purpose and what I think is fair, and it's not about defending my honor. It's not about proving my point. It's not about me. It's about God's will. It's about God's way. It's about God's time. And I made up my mind, I'm going to trust that God will deliver on his promise for my life without my help. Because he doesn't need me. He doesn't need me to put my hand to it. He doesn't need me to manipulate it. He doesn't need me to try to control it. God is big enough. He's in control enough to get me exactly where I need to be. And it's the same in your life. In fact, this is true of David. I'm skipping ahead in the story a little bit, but you go on, you read David's story, and he is not out there in the wilderness forever. God is so faithful to David, and he takes care of David. He takes care of that situation. He takes care of King Saul, and he takes care of the purpose and call that David had on his life to be the king of Israel. Before we go, I'm going to pray in a moment, but I do want to leave you with this. Is that David's story, I think, at least to me, and I think a lot of you would agree, is that it's so inspiring. You see decisions like this, and it just, as a follower of Jesus, it just inspires us. But his story is meant to be more than just inspiration. You see, if you're a Christian, if you've decided to follow Jesus, you need to know that this kind of greatness is required. In those moments when life seems unfair and you're being mistreated or overlooked or underappreciated, and it feels like the promise of God is never going to come, it's in those moments we need to remember, I'm not responsible to make a way for myself. I don't need to put my shoulder to the door. I don't need to take shortcuts. I don't need to figure out a way to remove all the obstacles. I don't need to make my own way. I can trust God to do that, and I will wait on God. And in my waiting, I'm going to pray for patience, and I'm going to pray that God would help me choose to not get bitter. And I will not replace what God has put in place. Some of you, you need to make that decision today. I will not replace what God has put in place. And if that person in authority is not walking in the integrity and the character that they should, I do not need to put my hand to it, because God is big enough to handle it in his will, in his way, in his time. And listen to me, you can trust him. You can trust God, because he sees the full picture and he knows your heart. It may seem like nobody even knows my heart. Nobody knows what I'm going through. God does. He knows your heart, and your future is in his hands, and nobody's going to snatch that away from him. Will you bow your heads and close your eyes? I want to pray for you this morning. Maybe you're here and you're going through a situation like David did, where it's just not fair. It might be an authority in your life. It might be just another person. It might be just a situation. And you'd say it's not right. It's not fair. And more than anything, you want to just speed up the process. You want to fight back. You want to put your hand to it. But as you listen to God's word, the Holy Spirit's been working on your heart, and you just feel this, I've got to surrender this. I got to take my hand off the wheel. I want to wait like David waited on God. I want to do that, but I can't do it by myself. I need the Lord's help. And if that's you, just so I know who I'm praying for, you just slip up your hand. Jesus, you see every hand and you see every heart. And Lord, I just pray, Lord, that you would help all of us just learn from David, how he was far more interested in your kingdom than he was his own kingdom. And Lord, I just pray, God, as people are walking through some hard things right now, Lord, I pray that you would help your people trust you in the waiting. Lord, would you supply all their needs? Would you give them grace to endure? Would you give them strength to keep standing? Would you give them hope and remind them that this small part of your life, this is not your whole story? Lord, that we would understand that even in hard times, under hard, unfair treatment, that you can use that to form us and mold us and make us more like you. And Lord, that's what we want to be. We declare that we are people after your heart, and we trust you, and we want your will. We want it to be your way, and we want it to be in your time. Pray that in Jesus' name. As we continue praying today, maybe you're here and you would say, Kirby, I feel far from God. Maybe you were a Christian at some point in your life and you've just kind of decided to do your own thing and walk your own way. Or maybe you've never surrendered your life to Jesus before and you would say, I feel far from God, and yet there's this strange thing going on inside of me where I just feel drawn to Jesus. And that's the Holy Spirit. Jesus said, nobody comes to me unless the Father draws them to me. And I just believe that for some of you right now, God is drawing your heart toward himself. And you'd say, I feel far from God, but you could know God today. And the only reason that is a possibility is because of what Jesus did for you and what he did for me on the cross. He shed his blood. He was nailed to a cross. He died on that cross. He was buried in a tomb, and he was dead for 3 days, and he rose from the dead, and he overcame the grave. He overcame sickness. He overcame death. And it is that Jesus that we can put our faith into and we can lean into, and he can change our lives. He can make you brand new in this moment. And so if you're ready to follow Jesus, I'm going to pray a very simple prayer, but I want you to take my words, and in your seat right now, I want you to make this prayer your heart. You may want to say these words out loud. You just pray these words and mean it in your heart. Say, Jesus, I'm ready to give my life to you. I'm so far from God, and I can't get to you on my own because my life is full of sin and wrongdoing. And so, Jesus, I'm coming to you because I believe that you're the Son of God and that you died for my sins and you rose from the dead. And so I ask you to forgive me of my sins. I ask you to take the weight of my sin and carry it. I ask you to put your Spirit inside of me. Make me brand new. And I am going to follow you all the days of my life. I love you, Jesus. Thank you for saving me. Thank you, God, for rescuing me. I love you, Jesus. In your name I pray. Amen.